Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Terminology in the Integral Yoga. Today, Consecration, Part 1, from Sri Aurobindo. Consecration becomes, in its fullness, a devoting of all our being to the divine, therefore also of all our thoughts and our works, the synthesis of yoga. Consecration is a process by which one trains the consciousness to give itself to the divine. Letters on Yoga. Continuing from Sri Aurobindo. All yoga is, in its nature, a new birth. It is a birth out of the ordinary, the mentalized material life of man, into a higher spiritual consciousness and a greater divine being. No yoga can be successfully undertaken and followed unless there is a strong awakening to the necessity of that larger spiritual existence. The soul that is called to this deep and vast change may arrive in different ways to the initial departure. It may come to it by its own natural development, which has been leading it unconsciously towards the awakening. It may reach it through the influence of a religion or the attraction of a philosophy. It may approach it by a slow illumination or leap to it by a sudden touch or shock. It may be pushed or led to it by the pressure of outward circumstances, or by an inward necessity, by a single word that breaks the seals of the mind, or by long reflection, by the distant example of one who has trod the path, or by contact and daily influence. According to the nature and the circumstances, the call will come. But in whatever way it comes, there must be a decision of the mind and the will, and as its result, a complete and effective self-consecration. The acceptance of a new spiritual idea force and upward orientation in the being, an illumination, a turning or conversion seized on by the will and the heart's aspiration. This is the momentous act which contains as in a seed all the results that the yoga has to give. The mere idea or intellectual seeking of something higher beyond, however strongly grasped by the mind's interest, is ineffective unless it is seized on by the heart as the one thing desirable, and by the will as the one thing to be done. For truth of the Spirit has not to be merely thought, but to be lived. And to live it demands a unified single-mindedness of the being. So great a change as is contemplated by the yoga is not to be effected by a divided will, or by a small portion of the energy, or by a hesitating mind. He who seeks the divine must consecrate himself to God and to God only. If the change comes suddenly and decisively by an overpowering influence, there is no further essential or lasting difficulty. The choice follows upon the thought, or is simultaneous with it, and the self consecration follows upon the choice. The feet are already set upon the path, even if they seem at first to wander uncertainly, and even though the path itself may be only obscurely seen, and the knowledge of the goal may be imperfect. The secret teacher, the inner guide, is already at work. Though he may not yet manifest himself, or may not yet appear in the person of his human representative. Whatever difficulties and hesitations may ensue, they cannot eventually prevail against the power of the experience that has turned the current of the life. The call, once decisive, stands. The thing that has been born cannot eventually be stifled. Even if the force of circumstances prevents a regular pursuit or a full practical self consecration from the first, still the mind has taken its bent and persists, and returns with an ever increasing effect upon its leading preoccupation. There is an ineluctable persistence of the inner being, and against it, circumstances are in the end powerless, and no weakness in the nature can for long be an obstacle. But if once there is a resolute self consecration from deep within, if there is an awakening to the soul's call, these inadequate things can be a sufficient instrument for the divine purpose. Therefore, the wise have always been unwilling to limit man's avenues towards God. They would not shut against his entry even the narrowest portal, the lowest and darkest postern, the humblest wicket gate. Any name, any form, any symbol, any offering has been held to be sufficient if there is the consecration along with it. For the divine knows himself in the heart of the seeker and accepts the sacrifice. But still, the greater and wider the moving idea, force behind the consecration, the better for the seeker. His attainment is likely to be fuller and more ample. From the mother to a young person, quote, "It is very simple, as you see. 1. The infinite force is the inexhaustible storehouse of forces. The individual is a battery, a storage cell which runs down after use. Consecration is the wire that connects the individual battery to the infinite reserve of forces. Or 2, the infinite is the river that flows without cease. The individual is the little pond that dries up slowly in the sun. Consecration is the canal that connects the river to the pond and prevents the pond from drying up." Some Answers from the Mother, Volume 16. And the last quote from the mother. Consecration generally has a more mystical sense, but this is not absolute. A total consecration signifies a total giving of oneself. Hence, it is the equivalent of the word surrender, not of the word soumission, which always gives the impression that one accepts passively. You feel a flame in the word consecration, a flame even greater than in the word offering. To consecrate oneself is to give oneself to an action. Hence, in the yogic sense, it is to give oneself to some divine work with the idea of accomplishing the divine work. From the Questions and Answers of Mother, Volume 4. Namaste.